Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today, especially after the special actions of yesterday. Today, we are going to start with our second keynote speaker, Alain Bourdin. Alain Bourdin is a professor of the French Institute of Urbanism. He directed this institute for a long time, from 2003 to 2011. He talked as well in so many French universities and foreign universities. He collaborated with the TICYUrb conferences in the both previous editions, and we are extremely happy to have him here with the support of the French Institute of the Culture of Portugal. Without more words, I give the time to Mr. Bourdin to present his interesting speech, which is called Why Urban Research Must Be Reinvented, and we wish you a fantastic time with us. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm afraid, first I'm going to speak English. That's always difficult for people listening to me, not for me, for people listening to me. And I'm afraid what I am going to tell you is very abstract, very philosophical maybe, and very, very, very French. Sorry for that. So, I'm going to try to speak you about urban research, and maybe beginning by criticizing what urban research is. Of course, urban research produces many works. They are often conducted seriously and strive to be in line with the standards of scientific production. I recognize their value. However, if I do not reason, sorry, I was just forgetting my PowerPoint. However, if I do not reason at the level of each individual work, but that of all of what may be called urban research, I must say I am disappointed. Marx posed as a law the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. I would say that there is a trend decrease in the rate of novelty and analytical or explanatory capacity of urban research. Why? We can always say that this is due to the poor quality of researchers, of the fact that urban issues are not fashionable, or to the weakness of research funds. I think these explanations are far too limited. The explanation is rather to be sought in epistemological issues. Urban research can be defined as an interdisciplinary field built around major thematic issues and structured by cross-cutting theories. According to this definition, its structure is, it's okay like that, is similar to that of gender studies, post-colonial studies, and so on. At the same time, in the major disciplines of the human sciences, there have long been sub-disciplines devoted to the city and which refer to the great questions of the mother discipline. Sociology is a typical example, with Weber's work on one side and Zimmel's work on the other. In contrast, the major transdisciplinary theories are rare. This is the role that some want Henri Lefebvre to play, but for those who know his entire work and the context and in which it has been developed, this interpretation seems very risky. In the absence of strong theories, some concepts or questions could play a structuring role in the field of urban research. In gender studies, this is the case with the notion of gender itself, and the work of conceptualization that takes place from it, the idea of a neoliberal city does not play this role, or plays it very weakly. First, because it is too wide, and therefore does not give useful problematic for field research. Secondly, because it too often corresponds to the statements of evidences that may justify a political or social criticism, but which stimulate very little research. Denunciation and research are two things that are perfectly useful, but also perfectly different. Urban research is thus not a strongly structured transversal field, but a rather disparate set in which at least as many centrifugal than centripetal forces are exerted. In particular, it must deal with two problems that are both theoretical and methodological. On the one hand, the absolute uncertainty over the definition of the object, the city. On the other hand, the problem posed by the existence of a discipline that in French we call urbanism, urbanistica in Italian, and which correspond for a part, but for a part only, to the discipline named planning at the international level. Since Cerda, this discipline claims to be a science, or at least a knowledge strongly referred to the scientific model. Let's look at these two issues. In 2008, Richard Florida, I don't like it, Richard Florida, Golden and Melander wrote a working text about mega regions. That is, integrated networks of cities with their suburban backgrounds within which work and capital can be moved at very low cost. The authors studied the 40 most important in the world, which they cut out from their luminous traces. That means continuous set of nocturnal luminosity. They characterize them by the economic activity, the number of patent fields, technological innovation, and the scientific author cited scientific innovation. Their population ranges from over 100 million to 3.7 million. Among them, we find Paris, but also a city named Barcelona-Lyon, which 25 million inhabitants, so which become not incomparable with Paris and even with Beijing or with Shanghai. Why not? And then they confront the ranking of these sets in terms of wealth, technological innovation, as I said, and scientific innovation. On reading this work, we first think that it is a fantasy object that can only exist in the imagination of Richard Florida. But some field surveys conducted in Lyon, Marseille, and Montpellier show that even this fantasy is based on elements of reality. There are many other similar approaches that emphasize the importance of urban areas in the global economy and tend to relativize differences, especially size, between cities in different regions of the world. All this shows how much the urban question, especially in metropolitan context, explodes and upsets a good part of our categories of reasoning. Here we find the expression of new ways of thinking about the urban questions that can't be dismissed. To say that the urban population is now the majority in the world and that the increase of the world's population will take place in big cities is true and important, but not enough. The very idea of urban dominance is debated by some statisticians, as shown by the article by Neil Brenner and Christian Smith in 2013. There is a lot of discussions about that. If we leave the macro scale, often monopolized by economic reasoning, to address to micro scale, that of lifestyles, urban culture, or the local economy, we also see a strong change into cities. In short, what can be called triumph of cities because of the number of their population and their economic and social domination, to the point of sometimes making them more powerful than state, also entails the greatest uncertainty about what a city is, and therefore on the way of making the city. In the last decades, we have built more than ever, and around the central cities and their classic suburbs has developed what we name in France peri-urban cities, and sometimes peri-metropolitan cities. It is made of areas in which elements of rural morphology and the formerly completed transferred small urban poles mingle with elements of new urbanization, while the activity, including agricultural activity, population, lifestyles, are integrated into the urban dynamics. In the old city of the industrialized countries, the industry moves either to other regions of the world or to other cities or even to other areas of the same cities. Ports are looking for deep water sites, which is a lot of land, which usually takes them away from their traditional sites, leaving significant brownfields for the creations of new waterfronts. Added to this are the military wastelands, and so on and so on. New cities are being mass-produced in much of the world. Towns that become rich capitals, as Dubai or Doha, display a very voluntarist, spectacular, and very vertical urbanism. Downtowns and business districts increase their density. Airports with ever-increasing flows are becoming major places for commerce. All these processes create a lot of new urban places. Many of them could be described as non-identified urban places. And I'm going to give you just some little example of that. That is a port, but it is not a port. It's in Buenos Aires. It's a port, but not a port. That is also a port in Sydney, but it is not a port. It's something different. That is the future new airport of Istanbul. What is it? It's a monster, a kind of monster. That's outside, that's inside. Shopping in airports, which is a very astonishing thing. And another example, that is a shopping center. And as it is in Napoli, it looks like the Vesuvio. And that is an historical district. But in fact, it is not an historical district. It's just a place for drinking, restaurants, and so on. So, and that is a parking, but it is not a parking. Sometimes, because of the Association of Town Center Managers of Belgium, sometimes it's become this kind of place, 1 day or 3 days. So it's a parking, but it is not a parking. And that is, I'm going to speak of that later on. It's the elephant in Nantes, and it's merry-go-round, but it is not. It's something completely unique. So that are some examples of what we can call non-identified urban objects. 2 revolutions are added to this. The so-called smart city, which is rather the city managed from data, and that is quite important. And the other one is the energy transition. Of course, I consider that sustainable development became a very important issue, let's say, 10 years ago. So I am speaking of what is now the new issues. So, at the same time, an awareness is slowly emerging. We discovered that the requirement of the different time scales are not the same and can contradict each other quite strongly. So different time scales. Fighting the excessive influence of cars in cities and developing public transport appears to be the best strategy choice for short-term mobility. But in the long term, with the development of electricity conservation technologies, with the autonomous vehicles, with the digital grids and many applications that can be born, which other technologies are, for example, platooning, which allows the formation of vehicle convoys piloted from the first of them, and a lot of new discoveries. It is likely, with all that, it is likely that mobility issues will arise in completely different terms, and to the extent of reducing the importance of heavy public transport infrastructures. That is a question about the metro of the Great Paris. Of course, for, let's say, 2024, for the Olympic Games, it's completely adapted, but maybe for 2050, it's not the good solution. And that is quite a problem for us. So we must try to anticipate what we do not really know yet. And that is a problem. Spatial scales also contradict each other. That of proximity, the scale of proximity, does not articulate functionally with that of the agglomeration and of the urban region. They express different modes of existence of the city which have different logics. So they are much more than scale in the traditional metric definition. They are something different. In the traditional conception of the hierarchy of center, they are supposed to maintain subsidiary types relations between themselves. Subsidiary typed relations between themselves. What does not belong to the center of proximity, for example, because it is too rare or too sophisticated, is to be dealt with at the higher level, and so on and so on. This does not correspond to what is found in many metropolitan contexts, as shown by the surveys that my team carries out in the Paris metropolitan area. The same geographical space, for example, that of a large shopping center, can be read differently depending on whether it is considered from three different scales, which are in fact three different logic of use. First, that of proximity and familiarity. Second, that of the territory of life, the places which we must have use of for the organization of the way of life or lifestyle. And third, that of destination, that is to say, places where we go to because they attract us. If this place, let's say a shopping center, is lived as a destination, one seeks experience the extraordinary. It must be extraordinary. It must be something unique. If it is read as a part of the territory of life, the problem becomes that it must offer, the problem because its offer meets the needs of the family, and through the prism of proximity, we look for usability, ease of access and use. And so they are completely different. And the physical distance has only a very relative importance in relation to all that. It's not the main issue. What is true of user perceptions and expectations is also true of many other levels of analysis. The success of a cluster, of an industrial cluster, a scientific cluster, is to combine the scale of destination with the insertion in large global networks, which makes that link with the main international airport can seem vital. International airport means insertion in large global networks. And so this scale, the scale of destination, is combined with the scale of proximity, which allows serendipity and creates the atmosphere, as said Marshall, of innovation. To say the same thing differently, the image of the fragmented city may not be right now. It is not an explosion in small pieces that means the idea of fragmentation, and which is an omnipresent image in the literature on the subject. But we could say it is a series of layers, whose autonomy asserts itself. We could speak of an hypertext city, as did François Hacher, or even mention the work of Dominique Desjeux on the scales and the specificity of logics of analysis at each level. Each scale has its specificity, and that is the main point. And so I prefer speaking of different layers, very different layers, than of fragmentation. It's not exactly the same idea. On the other hand, the evolution of cities can no longer be read as a continuous development of the same logic, even that of the neoliberal city, but as a broken line marked by very strong bifurcations. This concerns as well the general evolution of the world context as the technologies, the resource of the natural hazards and catastrophes which can put in danger a city or its functioning. As a result, the question of changes of direction, including backtracking, arises in stronger, in incomparably more diverse terms than in previous periods. Reversibility, reuse, resilience, these words are sources of more or less controlled images, but the fact that they gradually invade the landscape of urban studies is not just a matter of fashion or ideology, but reflects a major evolution. And it must be taken as a major evolution. These few elements contribute to a mutation of the urban question, which has many other dimensions. In particular, that of the system of actors and the general organization of action. The abundant literature on the neoliberal city emphasizes the deployment of capital in real estate investment globally, the role of, and also the role of multinationals, and of financialization processes. Financialization processes means the transformation of real estate investment into financial products. In this sense, of course, it is right. But these large processes only partially account for the transformation of urban production. First, because the large entities mentioned are embedded in actors, individuals, professional groups, subsidiaries, and so on. Thus, the personal experience, the tastes and belief of asset managers, for example. Asset managers are very important people. The taste also of financial analysts and other investment advisors strongly influence choice always presented as purely rational and deduced from the market. Just an example. Some years ago in Shanghai, I was discussing with the people representing a very important French multinational of luxury, and they were, and what is important is that they were financial analysts. They were not people from shopping or luxury, they were financial analysts. And they were explaining me why they did choose to build a shopping center in the district of Shanghai, which was not developed, with no people interested by luxury and so on. They were expecting, with a new railway station, they were expecting a new population. And it was just an expectation. It was something in their mind, but it was not real. And then they built this shopping center, a very important shopping center. And that is the illustration of what I am saying. Even if they are financial analysts, they have sometimes ideas that you don't understand from where they are coming. So, in fact, the process of the types the process of self-fulfilling prophecy is always going on, and they are very important. For example, experts say that an operation is a good investment. So it becomes easier to attract attractive operators, and their presence helps to create a success. And the operation can become a good investment only because people say it is. But remember, just look at the stock exchange. It works exactly the same way. And what happens in the financial sphere is always transformed by what people are thinking is true. The transformation of the system of actors are therefore not simply consequences of the process of transformation of the city, but elements of this transformation. New actors means new forms of the city. There is a general emphasis on the awakening of public actors in favor of private actors in many countries. That's true, of course. But maybe it is at least as important to note that the private sector itself is undergoing metamorphosis. It is completely changing the private sector. Building multinationals and developers are still building, but they are selling more and more services and management. So there is another function here of capital, of investment, because some years ago, the problem was to sell as quick as possible what you had built. Now you make money by keeping it and providing services and management, and that is quite different. The financial analyst mentioned just before have a place they did not have a few decades ago. The luxury multinationals are setting up. They control, in particular, the duty-free sectors in airports. That means a lot of money, which represent a considerable market. Big data managers have become major actors in the city production. IBM almost invented the smart city market. They did that some years ago, to which Google is now very interested, and which gives birth to a myriad of startups. They tend to transform the city into a data system made up of sensors and connected objects. Apart from the players who are indisputably linked to the major word processes, others, which are also new, seem to have the more autonomous and localized development, even if they take part in global trends. In Western cities, for example, this is illustrated by the new place of artistic expression on artists, or the role of what I don't know if the translation is a good one, of third-party actors. I don't know how to say that exactly in English. These actors can be at the origin of autonomous citizen initiatives to develop places or services or to produce social innovation. They can become true, totally self-taught specialists who have gained the expertise through the internet, for example. New professions are appearing, and old ones are undergoing major changes. At the same time, the modalities of action are transformed. Two processes have strongly marked the recent history of making the city. On the one hand, an insistence on the specificity of urban context and on the need to give them specific treatments. On the other hand, and it is the contrary, it's completely contradictory. On the other hand, the diffusion of labels, the multiplication of standards, norms, and so on, international norms, and so on. It is true that the contradiction is often solved by concentrating specificity in architectural objects, in architecture, and especially star architectures. But that is not what we could name urban project. It's something different. But beyond these two projects, these two processes, we should add first the new experiences linked to the empowerment of the population, co-design, concertation, that's one, and second, the importance of a mega project. In France, we can wonder if we will not stop making the city by major projects. That's in France and in many European countries. But they exist, this mega project exists with vigor in the rest of the world. Dubai, Shanghai, royal mega projects in Morocco, not to mention Astana and other places like that. A lot of places where you can find different kinds of mega projects. Finally, urban societies themselves change considerably. They are transformed by the process of individualization and at the same time by the emergence of new collective movements. The contradictions. Urban culture are changing. University graduates are increasing in number, and their influence the functioning of the largest cities, even if they rarely constitute a coherent social group able to impose itself politically. But they are important in the change of urban civilization. As I said above, a second problem encountered by urban research is the existence of the urbanism discipline. Its scientific vocation starts from the idea of optimum. That is to say that there is an ideal urban order, and that scientific method makes it possible to define it. Urbanism is then the science that mobilizes the various disciplines in the revelation of this order, which can change according to the times and the evolution of technologies and societies, but which is a universal order. Urbanism translates their prescriptions into methods for action. This conception is very typical of a moment in history. We find this at the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century in almost all human sciences. But today, the idea of an ideal urban order seems to be compromised. At least we have not managed to get closer to it. All attempts, starting with the Athens charters, having proved as failures. And so the idea of a universal order of the city, we can't believe it. A quotation from Raphael Fischer from McGill University in 2015 is very interesting. It's from its 50 proposal on urban planning. What does he say? He says, like most people involved in the urban planning processes, urban planners too often tend to ignore the fact that cities are complex, largely self-regulating systems of human action that are subject to various forces that planners only control on minimal way. They too often forget, planners, too often forget that a city or an human settlement is primarily a spatial distribution of people and activities, and only then a composition of physical structures supports its activities. In physical planning, these intellectual errors appear and are reinforced by the widespread use of two-dimensional plans at fairly large geographical scales and their relatively limited capacity to make the connection between rather abstract notions of use and density on one hand and the reality of everyday urban life on the other hand. That is what says Raphael Fischer. One of the interests of this quotation is to question the foundation of urbanism as knowledge, the posture of considering that one can understand complex systems here have a coherent and integrative overview, or to say that in more abstract ways, it identified and relate all causal relationship that can be discussed. Formulating such, and maybe it's not possible, maybe we can't do that. Maybe we can't understand complex systems, and that's the problem. Formulating, of course, formulating such ideas is always tricky because too many people get the idea that knowledge is useless because impossible, and that we can leave room for other modes of apprehension of urban objects, pure inspiration, pure aesthetic evaluation, megalomania of dictators, and so on and so on. Of course, this is not what I mean, but I mean that the type of knowledge relationship encompassing and hierarchical must be abandoned to rebuild another kind of knowledge which recognize that the truths, especially scientific truths, are partial and transitory, which leads rather to a greater vigilance on the modalities of their construction. This means that we also have to abandon the professional postures associated with this framework of knowledge. If the planner no longer thinks himself as the great federator of the professionals, due to the fact that he is the great integrator of knowledge, it is first of all because this integration of knowledge is an illusion. Not that there is no need to collaborate. On the contrary, the interaction of different expertises, different knowledge, is more than ever necessary. But the example in technologies of concurrent engineering has taught us that the interaction between expertise in a project is not to mix them in a more or less consistent magma, but to adapt them to the dialogue with others. The interdisciplinary soup shows every day its limits and sometimes its dangers, and there's the most important things often happens on the borders of disciplines or in space of knowledge that are still unidentified or badly marked, but it has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the big cauldron in which everything is mixed to create an unanimous discourse, politically correct, and which does not forget any of the ambient modes, a danger to which urbanism does not always escape. So, the object of urban studies is the city is changing, and perhaps no longer itself, while the central discipline of urban studies is undergoing a major crisis. What to do? What to do with that? It is therefore from a proposal of new orientation for this constituent knowledge linked to the action, which are called urbanism, urbanistica, or planning, that I will try to define some possible ways for urban research in a more general way. I will first plead for an incremental urbanism, as well in its way of building knowledge as in its action. In doing so, I will give the term a meaning a little different from the one we usually know. Indeed, if we take the example of the distinction between disruptive and incremental innovation as established by Christensen in 1997, the main aspect of the second is that it builds on what already exists, while the first offers something radically new. The central idea is that one adjusts the knowledge one acquires to that which one already possesses, and on the side of action, that one proceeds not according to a plan definitively established in advance, and which must be realized at all cost, that is the model in Tunnel, but by treating the problem as they arise, when they arise, which implies an interaction report with what is already done or established. The project approach, as described by Christoph Midler in 1993 in the book named The Car Which Did Not Exist, which is a wonderful book, correspond to this. We are not far from what the common language calls pragmatism, with an insistence on the link with what already exists. That's not, in fact, exactly pragmatism. It's quite different. I will add an element to this classical definition. Incremental urbanism is built up in stages according to the questions it faces. It does so in an iterative relationship with what is already established or accomplished, but also at each major step, it reconstructs its problematic in terms of knowledge and its project in terms of action. In other words, it asks the double question: what do I need to know now in the cognitive context in which I find myself? And second, which city or what territory or what urban object is what I want to do, and how it is referred to my initial choices. This defines a framework of one can be the project approach at the scale of a city or a territory. We know that in the case of the island of Nantes, the development of what they call the machines with the famous elephant I've shown you was not in the program. It was not. It has emerged in stages after they tried to define an iconic equipment in the style of the Guggenheim Museum of Bilbao, of course. And even once it appeared, the idea has continued to evolve. It did not stop. However, from the start, the question of making an event at the end of the island, an architectural event at the end of the island, was posed, and the machines are the result of its elaboration and concretization by an incremental and iterative process. But this incremental character becomes more complicated if we agree with what the quotation of Fischler, the cities are complex human systems, essentially self-regulating and subject to various forces that planners only control in minimal way, as I said. This can lead to a general conception of town planning that can be found especially among professionals in North America or in certain conceptions of placemaking everywhere in the world. It could be called urbanism of mediation. The reference actor then becomes the trusted third party, considered as a kind of accelerator of self-regulation by facilitating interactions between the stakeholders, by circulating the information, or by applying to translate the request. This goes very well with iterative and to a lesser extent incremental approach. and the other hand, and that is undoubtedly the most important, an incremental approach must today respect the great methodological requirement popularized by the definition of sustainable development. That is always reasoned within the framework of the paradigm of consequences. Paradigm of consequences. As I said, urbanism or urban planning has reasoned a lot about an optimum or an ideal to achieve the good city. It has gradually integrated principles coming from the management and implying that we organize ourselves from what the action must produce, not in the ideal, but in a system of constraints and in relation to deadlines. The effects produced by urban action are also taken into consideration, but it is still in a limited temporal, spatial, and thematic horizon. For example, by wondering whether the creation of a metro line will raise the price of land nearby of the station. The reasoning in terms of consequences go further. It is based on the systemic idea that the field of effects cannot be limited, that the effect of effects are just as important as the effects themselves, and that therefore that times, spatial, thematic horizons must be unrestricted. It favors sequences, unexpected consequences, systemic relation. This type of approach might not have an end, but if we must stop at the limit of existing knowledge of the time available, it remains as a methodological principle to go as far as possible in the identification of the analysis of consequences, as far as possible in analyzing consequences. The paradigm of consequences obviously maintains privileged links with complex action notions such as the precautionary principle. Its introduction into urban issues goes hand in hand with the interest in reversibility or resilience, and more generally in systemic approaches. However, this paradigm is not very popular in our fields, and we have few tools to practice it, and we need tools to practice it. But to go further, a lot of times, but to go further in our reflection, we must return to the object itself, the city, and what means the action of making the city. Roughly, the city today seems structured by three major systems. First, flows of information, goods, and people. Second, land use, partially financialized and therefore made more abstract. Financialization means abstraction. Third, data, especially those that come into the device of the smart city. These three systems constitute the framework within which urban dynamics and transformations take place, be they economic, social, or political. One vocation of urban planning, and generally of urban research, is to look for how one makes city with this system. Practically, that means to analyze the links between flows, materiality, and social organization. The links between land values and the practices and uses of space, which is undoubtedly an important role of work on the public space in neighborhoods more dedicated to international investments. And also to give a social meaning to the data, that is to say, to link them to form, practices, values, groups, and territories, in short, to citizen states, and not only to technocratic states, concerning the cities and its operation beyond the only issues of the protection of privacy, which is not the only issue possible. To go further, the function of urban planning must no longer be defined as making the city, whether by study, planning, or project. Its origin is perhaps not to create, it's not to create an urban order, or even to fight against urban disorder. The function of urbanism planning and even urban research must perhaps be defined as the methodology of creating or increasing urban values. Of course, that is given to discussion. In this area, the basic definition always refers to the profitability of investment. Creating value means first and foremost making profitable investment. But, and that is the common definition, but even in economics, this financial definition can be broadened when, for example, it is used to talk about an activity or an economic sector that creates employment, even it does not get money, it does not get profit. So that is another use of the idea of creating value. Nothing prevents us from going further and opening the debate on urban values and what it means to create or add urban value. In my book, so maybe I can, I must do something. Let's say, just a moment, please. So well, I think I know what I'm going to do. Okay. So in my book from 2000, which was named the local question, or something like that, I said, I evoked what I name exclusive resources, and I define them like that. There are many resources available only in a given place. Those related to tradition, daily interaction, the knowledge of informal rules, or the game, and so on. Rules of game, sorry, and so on. Whoever has a large stock of this resource obviously wants to use them, so he is strongly tempted to locate his action. And I said further, these resources are recyclable in a two-step process. First, their local validation, then their export as unique produce from this validation. The revival of a cheese named Aligo, and it's not a cheese, it's a cooking with cheese and potatoes. The revival of Aligo in Aubrac, part of France, its country of origin, is the foundation on which the marketing of this product has been based throughout all France. Today, I would formulate things a little differently, saying that it is a general mechanism of local value creation that supposes this double movement, first of local recognition, hence of appropriation, use, and positive identification, first, and then of valuation on or by an external market or in a non-economic recognition device on a scale other than local. A local artist gains value if he is recognized elsewhere, but value does not come only from the mechanism of exclusive resources. It can come from the capture of resources that are located elsewhere or that are circulating, get a business location, the presence of a celebrity or a luxury store, or even the spontaneous location of this resource without the need to capture this. This raises the question of a third process, that is the establishment of devices, equipment, services, actors that allow the creation of value from the constitution of exclusive resources and from the capture or reception external resources. All this is usually translated in economic terms, but could be analyzed in other terms, for example, cultural or social ones. But this ability, and I will finish shortly, but this ability to create value, whatever process is used, becomes essential for cities and for all the territories that are part of the process of globalization. Because of the omnipresent presence and strength of competition, but also for a more and paradoxal sociological reason, because the notion of optimum, even if it has no scientific significance, as I said before, the notion of optimum and the notion of quality become very powerful in the social imaginary. At the same time as the use prevails over the possession, so we always try to attach more value to what we have to obtain. So we always try to attach more value to what we have or to obtain what is more valuable, as evidenced by the race for objects which are supposed to be more and more satisfactory, even if they are not. Look at Apple. It's a very good example of that. But also by the radicalization behaviors in asceticism or the search for more and more extraordinary experiences. So, as I spoke during 1 hour, I propose to stop here, just saying that what I wanted to explain is that there is a kind of crisis. The word crisis is always used, and we could try to use another word than crisis. But there is a problem with urban research, and especially there is a problem with, first, the object, the city. Another one is with this particular science, which is urbanism, which is really with a crisis. And then maybe we have to change some definitions, and especially to get out of the idea of a good order of the city. And then try to have another approach. I said my idea was giving value, but what is important is not the way I said it. What is important is the idea that we must get rid of this conception of an urban order, the order of maybe the order of the capitalistic organization, or the order of other people. It does not matter. The problem is that probably we can't think the city with the idea of order, but we must look for other ways of thinking. And that was the important point of what I said. I thank you.
Hello. We have time for 2 questions. Some comments? Don't be shy.
Okay, then I would like to start with my first question. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very, very interesting. And yesterday, after our final presentation, we started discussing something that I would like to return to you, this question. So given what you just said, and that there is some challenges for urban research with regards to theory and practice, some people would argue that we should move away from an attempt to increasingly become more and more scientific in our research and instead adopt a more of a humanistics approach. So adopting a more metaphoric discourse or opening our research to different interpretations according to different contexts and different realities, obviously. So I would like to ask your opinion on this, and if you agree, disagree, or what's your thoughts on this?
Okay.
Just now, it's a very complicated question. Sorry. Well, we have. I'm going to give my interpretation of your question. Of course, in fact. I think we face 2 problems. The one is the problem of truth. And we can't forget what is happening with the post-truth ideology, which is more important than the idea of fake news. What is important is the post-truth ideology. And I think we have not, well, I think that is my point of view, we have to fight against that. And everywhere, every time, we have to fight against that. And then that is a problem for us in our relationship with ideologies. Because ideologies have, in a way, a very positive role when they help us to ask questions. And they have a very negative role when they define the answers. And so we must be very careful in our relationship with ideologies. And I think the solution is not refusing discussions with ideological point of views, but we must be careful and accept what is coming from ideologies as questions, but be very aware of how we use ideologies. And so that is the first question I understand for your question. The first one and the first answer I want to give, that there is a problem. There is really a problem with the post-truth and so on. So, and that it could be quite complicated issue, because that means also that postmodern theories are a problem, because sometimes postmodern theories says there is no truth, there is my truth, and there is no scientific truth, and so on. And that is a big problem, I think. I think it is a big problem. The other question is how to transform the scientific approach, because we have also a problem with the scientific approach. When we look to the history, especially of social sciences, human sciences, let's say, when you look to this history. You can see that in the international traditional conception of human sciences, the scientific model is a scientific model from the end of the 19th century. It's the science as it was thought at that time. And another very important root of human sciences, which is a German one, with Dilthey and what came after Dilthey. All that has been not completely, but has been minorized. And it's now the minority. And the leading conception, leading epistemological conception is a very old one. And we have certainly, and I think it's very important for all human sciences, and especially for research, urban research, for sociology, for political sciences, and so on. It's on geography. It's very important to invent new definitions, a new way, new methodology, and so on, of the scientific approach. And maybe the problem is not using, for example, artistic aspects that could be used. That's not a problem. The problem is defining a new epistemology for human sciences. And so it's not post-truth. We believe that we can define scientific truth. But maybe our scientific truth would be quite different from those of the end of the 19th century. Did you accept my translation of your questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Here. My question will follow up the concept that you proposed in your presentation about non-identified urban object or even non-identified urban places, which is very much a current tendency in many cities. But at the same time, my question will also seeing from the point of view, today we use the reference from other cities like what happened in Dubai, what happened in Doha, what happened in Shanghai. Even from our first day, we discussed that as well, from our first keynote until many panels as well. But on the other hand, many other cities or the other cities that becoming another global world, there is somehow a tendency to use this kind of formula. So while in an academic scholarly debates, we use that reference to critically analyze, while on the other hand, many other cities in the world follow this kind of formula, creating international airport as a new global hub, creating a new built spaces in the middle of nowhere to create another kind of this. So how then we as in a scholarly work to bridge this point between the tendency to follow this kind of formula in designing an urban places using the non-identified object, while at the same time it looks like every group is just speak in their own conversational bubble. The academic scholar always using the same reference to critically analyze, while at the same time the more city they use the same formula. How then we in a scholarly work supposed to bridge this kind of point, while at the same time we kind of like, I'm personally feeling sad. I study as well from 2015 about this non-identified urban public sign happening in many other parts in the world as well. So then what your suggestion in a scholarly work to bridging this point? Thank you.
I think I'm going to comment your question. Not really give an answer, but comment it. First, when I show non-identified, the aim was to emphasize the paradoxal aspects of a lot of urban creations, of a lot of new urban places. And it was just to give you some pictures and so on. And with one idea, it's paradoxal. Even I gave you example of very large places and also of little places. 2 slides were devoted to, let's say, little places. And they are also paradoxal. That is the first, that was the idea. But commenting your question, your question is very interesting about references, because we all are, how can I say that, dependent of dominating references. And we don't have methodology about how to use references. And the way references are circulating in the world, I mean, either on the part of actors, architects, developers, and so governments, and the part of researchers. Researchers also use, as you said, the dominating references. And in fact, that is a problem. And that is a methodological problem. Because the main references, we can find them very easily. And it's what I did. I went on internet. I know there is a huge airport being built in Istanbul. I know also about the airport of Dubai. And you find it very easily. And we are victims of that. And probably we have to choose how we select our references. And my second, and that can be discussed because it's very interesting. And my second, I must say that we are preparing an issue of our review, Revue Internationale d'Urbanism, and even we can accept text in English. And we are preparing an issue about models, references, and how they are going through the world. But my second comment is about, it's difficult to say, but my second comment will be about the scale of references. The problem is that the city is made by huge projects, but also, and it is very important, by what sometimes are called proximity urbanism. And the problem is for the researcher, not to only study something which is going on, an action going on in a little neighborhood, but is try to think what is proximity urbanism. You understand what I mean? It's not only to look at one example or another example, because in urban research, there is a problem with the monographic approach. If you look back to the history of human sciences and, for example, of geography or anthropology, Redfield was the pope for monography, and we discussed the Redfield studies and says monography is not the alpha and omega of science. And sometimes today sometimes today we are just having this kind of research. I must be prudent, but sometimes we just are very happy because we are in a monographic approach, and that we must be aware of that. And then it's easy to speak about great projects, huge projects, mega projects. It's easy to speak about, to give a general idea of the main investments in urban issues and so on. It's much more difficult to try giving an explanation, a theory about proximity urbanism. And it's difficult because proximity urbanism is local. But it's not because it is local that we cannot have theories about it. So that was my comments about your question. I did not really answer, but I thought I could give this kind of comments. Thank you.
Sorry, I've just enjoyed the opportunity to do a little bit of propaganda. I am from the Institut Français du Portugal, and I see that there are a lot of students and young urban researchers here, of course, as it is the object of your conference. So just think of France if you want to study abroad. There are lots of opportunities. There are lots of very good research in France, and of course Professor Alain Bourdin is a great example of this. And there are opportunities also of funding at the Erasmus level, at the master level, at the PhD level. We have programs also at the Institut Français du Portugal. So Manuel has my contact. You can of course come in contact with us, and also check campusfrance.org, where there are many opportunities to study in France. Sorry to have taken a little bit of time, but I wanted to enjoy the opportunity.